Hello, everybody. Once again, I come to you from the comfy basement to this time talk about creating some impactful work programs and the whole process in how to create work program. What we've noticed throughout the years is that sometimes agencies seem to get stuck a little bit in a rut and continue to run the same work programs over and over. What we like to see and what we hope is happening is that throughout the course of time, we're using our documents that we have, such as our community action plan, our needs assessment, customer satisfaction reports, input from our boards, communities, and things like that. And we're constantly changing and working on new programs. So today's conversation is going to kind of focus on the creation of impactful work programs. Now, this is a presentation that I did last year at the annual meeting, but I think it's definitely worth redoing, given that we have a lot of new coordinators, a lot of new people in positions of creating work programs. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started here and start talking a little bit about the creation of impactful work programs. When we're creating impactful work programs, what we want to do is we want to look at some of the best practices. I'm going to talk about the common observations first, some best practices. Using ROMA whenever we're creating programs and whenever we're looking at work programs to look at how well designed they are and impactful they are. I also look at the work program development, and then I'll give you a few of my final thoughts, Jerry Springer style. So first, let's talk about the common observations. So some of the common observations we have is, like I said before, we're kind of stuck in the past. So we have this work program that we've done, and whenever we go out and our grant managers are monitoring, or I'm talking to a CSBG coordinator and executive director, I say, why are we doing this work program? It doesn't seem like there's that many people involved with it or whatever. And a lot of times I hear the answer, well, we've always done that. And I understand that sometimes it's difficult to change and we feel that there's some things that identify the agency, but we also need to be willing to move forward and do that. So with that, the same old. Let's get some new, fresh ideas and utilize the documents and the resources we have on hand in order for us to get that. We also want to make sure that there's justification for the work programs, and by that I mean utilizing your community needs assessment on helping you decide and help drive that work program creation. If you can't justify it through a needs assessment through your community action plan, then we probably don't need to be running that work program. Another thing we see whenever work programs develop, we see poor targeting, and by that I mean we maybe see a work program that was ran last year, and they said that they were going to serve 100 people, and whenever we look at the fourth quarter report numbers, the targeting shows that they only served 20 people last year, but yet we're still sticking in that we're going to serve 100. So we need to be doing some analysis and looking at it, even if it's a work program that we've ran before. We need to be using historical data, looking at that historical data, and coming up with numbers that actually make sense whenever we're doing our targeting for the number of people who are going to be participating in that program, as well as the number of people who are going to be successful in the program. And I think that that's something else that we need to keep in mind, is that not all participants are successful, and that's okay. I mean, we're working as hard as we can and doing what we can to get as many successful participants as possible. But it's okay that it's not 100% are successful. And the next thing that we have whenever we look at some of the programs and are reviewing them is the lack of detail in the work program. So a lot of this detail is in there to help the agencies um, be able to guide that work program, especially if there's turnover like mid-year or something like that. You should really be able to look at that scope of work on your work programs and understand exactly what what it takes to run this program, uh, what who it's going to serve, what services are being offered, who the partners are, what kind of things the steps agencies will do, what kind of steps, what are the expectations from the customer for this work program. And then the final observation we see is the budgeting. A lot of agencies struggle on the budgeting issues. They let the fiscal office over here do the budgets, and then over here on the programmatic side, they just kind of, I don't want to say make up numbers, but they just kind of throw numbers into work program. We need to have some sort of logical reasoning on how those numbers got there. So when we are reviewing work programs, some of the best practices we see are those agencies who utilize ROMA whenever they're developing their work programs. So we need to use that entire ROMA cycle, and we'll talk about that in more depth here in just a little bit. And it also starts with strategic planning. So we know that strategic planning is part of the organizational standards that we look at, and I believe it's every 5 years that an agency should have an updated strategic plan. That strategic plan really drives the agency, and without a plan for the future and tying in everything that the agency is doing into that common mission, that common goal, it's difficult to stay focused and to be able to perform at the high levels which all of you strive to do, and most of you do perform at a very high level. It also work programs also really go out to a very thought out community action plan. The more time you put into and more effort you put into conducting a good needs assessment and then analyzing the results of that needs assessment, really looking at that data and coming up with not only what are the problems, what are the needs within the community, but why are they needs? And getting to the root cause of those needs, and then developing a community action plan that's designed to address those needs. And then, as I mentioned on the previous slides, the analysis of past results. So if you're doing a work program that you've ran for 2, 3, 4 years, and every year you say that you're going to serve 100 people, and every year you only serve 25 people, we really need to analyze those results and say, okay, what am I changing this year in order to go from 25 up to 100? Or maybe I need to reduce that number from 100 down to 25. We see quite often that agencies are excited when they're talking about a new program, and that gets us excited, and they've got big expectations for it. So maybe that first year they're really excited and looking forward to this new program, and so they think, yeah, everybody's going to want this, and after the first year, when a quarter or a half of the people signed up that they thought, they start generating that those results they can start looking at as a plan for the future to adjust their numbers and not stay with the old numbers. So where's Roma's role in creating the work program? So as we all know, Roma has the 5 different cycles which are listed here on the screen. When we talk about the assessment phase first, we're talking about that needs assessment. We're talking about the community action plan, going out and figuring out what it is that the community, that the service area is in need of. Then the planning phase really is in that community action plan. As you're planning it out, as you're filling it out, and it even goes past the community action plan. As you're writing the scope of work, as you're in those discussions with with agency staff, with your board, with community members, planning out exactly how are we going to execute this? What all do we need? Um, the better we plan, the better our results are going to be. Then the next thing is implementing that. The stronger your plan is, the easier the implementation process is. So as you implement your work program and you start going through and you're working your plan, and I can't stress enough how important it is to be able to have a plan that has a solid enough foundation and is clear cut enough that as you go to the implementation phase, you can work that plan to help be able to guide how that program will run throughout the year. And then the next thing we're looking at is the achievement of results. So, how many people achieved? Uh, how successful were we? And that's important for us to keep in mind and measure and to look at, because the achievement of results and knowing what the results were that we got out of this work program, and compared to the in the planning phase where we're looking at what we think we can, and then we're looking at the achievement of results. How many do we actually get? Which takes us into the evaluation phase, whereas we start evaluating it. Did we achieve what we thought whenever we were planning it? Did we fall short when we implemented? Was there some key steps that we missed in planning during the implementation phase that we need to incorporate in so that program can be a stronger program next year? And that leads us back around to the assessment, and that's why it's the ROMA cycle and not the ROMA line, is because we're constantly going through this process of assessing, planning, implementing, looking at our results, evaluating, and going through this on a regular basis. So when we look at the assessment, that's the work program development. The agency mission statement plays into this, the community needs assessment. The resources are available in your community. We want to evaluate your current work programs, as you saw from the previous slide. That's a step, the last step, which leads into the first step. So evaluating what you've done, and identifying the top needs that can be addressed by CSBG. As we all know, just because it shows up on the community needs assessment doesn't necessarily mean that the agency has the capacity or the resources in order to be able to do that. So planning again is beginning to develop that work program for the top needs that the agency has the capacity for. You need to think about what the measurable outcomes are, and it's very important that we have measurable outcomes, and we're looking at what we can do. We want to make sure, for example, whenever I think about the housing outcomes, when we're looking at the difference between finding somebody a house that's homeless and them obtaining house, or taking somebody who's maybe going through an eviction process or delinquent on their rent or whatever, and working with them to maintain that household. And then looking at that over a 30, 60, 90-day period, and continuing to track things. So that's also in the planning. We're also identifying the services to be provided. What services are needed in order for us to meet that need, in order for us to minimize that need that's in the community. We utilize our targeting to project the success rate. How successful do we think we're going to be? And this is very important as we circle back around into the evaluation period, and then back into the assessment period the next time after the evaluation period. We can look at our success rates, and we can look at things such as that to be able to evaluate how well we operated that work program, and then as we go back into the assessment period and all that, what changes do we need to make for next year to make that a stronger, better better work program. And then determine how to document services and outcomes. So that's a big thing when we're talking about documentation. That's something that we need to make sure as you're writing your work programs on the method of tracking in the bottom of the work program. How are we going to document this, that we provided that service? How are we going to document the successful outcome? A lot of times we see people just enter that client files. Well, client files is not a documentation that services were received or an outcome was achieved. You know, it's items that maybe are obtained are within that client files, such as case notes or invoices or certificates of completion, sign-in sheets. All of those things document the services and the outcomes. Client files does not, that is not a documentation. It's just where that documentation is housed. And then we also need to have a system in place to track services and outcomes. And as you know, we utilize STARS electronically to track those services that are taking place and the outcomes that are achieved. But you need to have those internal services or internal system also to know how's that information going from the client being served to it making its way to being entered into the system. Um, so implementation is throughout the grant cycle, like I say. You know, that's working the plan. It's monitoring the progress. That's why we have the quarterly reports on the CSG. So we're getting better as we're growing our capacity within OCA. We're getting better at looking at our quarterly reports and doing an analysis of that quarterly report. And our grant managers are starting to ask those questions. Hey, we're halfway through the year, but you're only 10% through this work program. You know, let's think about this. Do we need to modify it? Do we need to change it? You know, it's also important that we're communicating these results and where we're at with our board and other people within the agency, so that everybody's aware of where we're at and how we're doing. So the achievement of results actually comes at the end of the process, you know, where you're measuring the actual results and you're reporting on the final results. The reporting on the final results, I think, is an area that as a network we can get so much better at reporting what we do, all the good things that we do. I know there's a lot of agencies that have an annual report that they put together. But where does that annual report actually go? Are we sharing that annual report with the public, or are we just sticking it out on our websites without even telling anybody that it's there? You know, let's make that report easy. And I don't want to say shove it in people's faces, but let's make sure that we get the word out on what we're reporting and what we've done and what our results are. So finally, again, the evaluation, you know, where we analyze the data, the work program, have the desired outcomes. You know, this is where we figure out recommendations for any changes for next year and adjust the performance goals for next year or any other thing that we need to do. So now that we kind of have the ROMA cycle in there, you know, and ROMA talks a lot about logic models. So I've had people say to me in the past, you know, why don't we use logic models when we're developing our work program? And what I've got on the screen right now is just kind of a standard basic logic model. And my argument to those people and my statement whenever the logic model fans start asking me about us using logic models is we actually really do use a logic model. So our summary statements, for example, is the planning. Our objective is kind of the intervention piece of it. When we're talking about you know, the outcome measures that we're using, you know, and the outcomes, that's the benefit, and the outcome indicators is also, you know, in that benefit part. So we have all those pieces of a logic model in here. We're looking at the measurement tools. When we're talking about the method of tracking, and when we're talking about other funding source that falls into the accountability parts of the logic model. So let's get down a little bit deeper now into as we're writing our work programs. When we're writing our work programs and looking at that, STARS will help us through the process a little bit, but then we also have to do some. So when we're writing our work program, the first thing we have in STARS is basically the title and the program category, glossary number. These all tie to the federal service category. And that's the category that we have to report to. The feds give us these defined service categories, and we use that whenever we're compiling the annual report and reporting on up to the federal government. So what we really should be doing to drive everything is the desired outcome should drive which federal service category is used. And what I mean by that is if maybe the service that we're offering is, say, daycare, we need to look down into why is daycare being needed? Are we helping people pay daycare because they're trying to go to school, which is an educational type category, or are we helping people pay daycare because they've been unemployed for the last 6 months and we're helping to pay the first week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks of daycare until they get that first check so that they can pay their own daycare, which is falls underneath the employment category. So there's a lot of different reasons why maybe what the service is, that it's what that end result, why are we doing this service, is where it falls into that federal category. So I mean, you can look at the same with the employment training. Am I sending somebody to say a technical to get them more education, or am I sending them to the technical school because the end result is I'm working to get them a job? If we're working to get them a job, then that's employment activity. If we're just working to get their degree or a certificate or something like that, and we have no intentions to follow through to help them get a job, then that's more of an educational function. I hope this makes sense to people. So again, let's look at what that final what the desired outcome is. What am I trying to accomplish with this work program in order for me to deem it a success? And then we tie that outcome gets tied back into the federal service category that we're needing. So again, when we're in STARS and working on it, the total number of persons served, the number of individuals you expect to receive a service. And that is different than the total outcome target, which is the number of individuals that you expect to receive a successful outcome. So especially when we're talking about something such as a longer term case management type thing, and maybe when we're working with a segment of the population that we have a desired outcome of obtaining their GED. So that's our desired outcome, is to obtain the GED. And we know that it takes weeks, if not months, in order to get somebody through the process, get them enrolled, get them in the classes and studying and taking their test and passing the test, and then they get the GED. So the number of people who enroll, we're not automatically going to have 100 people enroll and 100 people get their GEDs. We have to be aware of that and think about it. So the number of people we expect to serve is 100 people because we want to enroll 100 people. But maybe history has shown us and past results have shown us that about half the people that we get enrolled are successful in the program. So our outcome target would be 50, while the number of persons served would be 100. And again, this circles back to talking about using past data and analyzing past results to start coming up with the numbers and figuring out, the percentages of maybe that are going to be successful. Uh, and I can't stress enough, not all services will necessarily receive a successful outcome, and that's not a bad thing. And it's an unrealistic expectation to think all services are going to result in a positive outcome. Uh, Now there are services, say our food pantries and things such as that, where we have somebody coming in to the food pantry. We know that if they walk into the food pantry, they're going to walk out with a bag of food or a box of food, however that takes place. So we know that in all likelihood, that's going to be 100% success rate. But when we're talking about other things, we know that we're going to provide a service to people, but they're not going to be able to follow all the way through to be able to obtain that outcome. So, um, so let's look at the summary. So when we're looking at the summary as we're writing a work program, the summary should identify the problem. So that comes from your community needs assessment, where we're identifying the problem. So the problem is chronic homelessness. The problem is um, um, people lacking a high school degree in order to be able to obtain employment. The problem is people being unable to afford their copays because of the cost of insurance is higher and their copays went up. So that would be the problem or the need or the situation which the work program is designed to address. So that's what we're identifying in the summary is we should be able to read that summary, and when you're writing the summary, we should be able to easily identify the problem, the need, the situation that we're addressing with this work program. So it's your problem statement. Then you have the objective, and the objective should be identifying what services are being performed to address this problem. What are the various services? So, for example, Sangamon County has a really good CNA type work program in which they take people with potentially without a GED, without the experience, and they go through financial literacy training, they go through GED classes if needed, they go through all of these different steps to finally get to where they've got that CNA. Some of it is they assist some people with transportation costs. They may assist some people with daycare costs while they're attending school. So what we're looking at is in this objective, we're talking about okay, the ultimate service we're providing is getting somebody the CNA license, but here's the other services that we're offering in order to get them. And that objective should highlight each of those services and how many of those people. Not everybody that comes into that program, for example, may need assistance with transportation, or they may not need assistance with daycare or some of the other. They may already have their GED. So through the historical data, we're deciding what number of out of the larger number of people that are going to obtain, what number are going to need each of those different services. The objective should also identify the time frame for which activity will take place. So what we're talking about on there, if the time frame is throughout the entire grant period, you can kind of leave that alone. That kind of is stated. But maybe you're doing some sort of school supply type program that only runs in August and September. And so you would state that in the objective, that in the months of August and September, you'll be taking applications to do this and that. And then the last thing that the objective should talk about is the number of customers that are going to be served and what's that benefit. So how many customers are you planning on serving? So maybe on the school supply one, we're planning on serving 150 customers, and they're going to get a maximum benefit of $75 worth of school supplies, or an average of $50 worth of school supplies. So we're talking about, this is the number of customers, this is the benefit that they're going to receive, the maximum benefit that they can receive. And that's going to help you. I know we had a case just recently with one of our agencies that the customer went through the governor's office, which trickled down through our director's office all the way down to me, in which she was complaining about the fact that she didn't feel she got enough services. And so I'm able to go to those work programs. I'm able to say, ma'am, according to the work program, the agency is only able to do this. And then whenever I had talked to the agency already before talking to her, I was able to say the agency, according to the work program, is only able to do this with CSVG. But through CSVG and other funding sources, they gave you this, which was a lot more than what we were able to provide. And it basically stopped that in the track. And I'm able to go back and support the agency in why we're not providing more services in this program. So the next thing we have is the agency activities, and this is a step that sometimes I think agencies, this has to do with that planning process and thinking through how are we going to run the work program, and that's what this is trying to get you to do is how are you going to run the programs? What steps are you needing to take? And where this is really important is especially whenever we have a change in say the executive director position or the CSBG coordinator position, or you even have a grant manager asking and talking about things. This should lay out exactly what steps I'm taking when it's going to occur. You know, to me, all of these activities should almost always start off with informing the community that service is available. Because what's the point of having a work program and a service and not telling anybody you have it and just expecting people to show up and ask for it? You know, we have to do a better job of informing the community of what services we have available. Uh, and then likewise, at the end of that agency activity, the very last agency activity should talk about how you're reporting the results of this activity to the board and the community. These all live in the organizational standards. We have these requirements in organizational standards. It's also part of that ROMA cycle and in the evaluation period and in the assessment period going into the next year. You know, we need this information in order to do the planning and things like that. So likewise, we have the customer steps, which detail out what the expectations of the customer is. This is where you say, you know, the customer has, you know, X number of days to provide all the needed documentation. The customer needs to attend financial literacy in order to receive rental assistance. The customer needs to do A in order to get B or whatever the case may be. This is another very important step for you is if a customer is expecting to get the final benefit, this final service outcome successfully, but they don't want to do steps 1, 2, and 3. They just want to jump straight to 4 and 5. You know, this is our way of talking to the customer and being able for us to be able to support you and for you to be able to support why they didn't get 4 and 5 because they didn't do 1, 2, and 3. When we're going to move on now to the outcome measures and I want you whenever you're coming up with the outcome measures, think about the story you want to tell. And there's a couple different stories we can tell, and I think the best examples of this right now is in the housing programs and the employment programs where we have unemployed and obtained a job, and then maintain that job for 30 days, for 90 days, for 180 days. So the goal would be for our agencies, our network, to grow the capacity to be able to track these long term so that we can continue to tell a bigger story. Because what sounds better? Me saying that we got 25 people a job, and then the next question is, oh, that's great. You got them a job. How long did they work at that job? And I say, I don't know. We just got 25 people a job. Um, so that's not a very detailed story. That's just a statement of I got 25 people a job. The better story to be able to say is I got 25 people a job and we followed up with them after 30 days, and 24 of those 25 people were still working at that job. And then I followed up again after 90 days, and we had 20 of those 24 people still working a job. And I followed up after 6 months, and we still had 15 of those 20 that were still working a job. So now whenever I say I got 25 people a job, and 15 of them kept that job for at least 6 months, that shows good long-term results. And that's the story that we want to be able to tell, and that's a story we need to be able to tell to our leadership and the funding sources and Congress, in order for us to be able to maintain our funding levels and then increase our funding levels. So the telling of the story and what the results of our outcomes were is probably one of the most important things that we've got. Then the next thing comes in that I want to talk about is a method of tracking. And again, this is very important for us to be communicating, for you to be communicating to us here at the state, or in the event that we have federal auditors come in from either HHS or OIG's office or wherever it may be. We want to make sure that we're clear on what that method of tracking is, that we know how we're going to be looking at a success. So again, method of tracking is not client files. Method of tracking are documents maintained within the client files most commonly, but they are not client files themselves. So for example, if you wrote a financial literacy work program and you said that in order to be a success, they had to attend 4 out of 5 sessions and they had to receive a score of 90% or higher on a final exam. So that method of tracking to show that they received the service and that was a successful outcome would be sign-in sheets for those sessions. So we'd be looking at that to make sure that that individual's name is on each of those sign-in sheets. And then we'd also be looking at something that showed that they passed that exam with a 90%, whether that's actual exam itself or whether that's a certificate of achievement that's in the file saying you successfully completed the financial literacy course and scored, over 90% on the final exam, however that would be worded. So that's showing, how we're tracking that the service was provided with the sign-in sheets and how we know that the outcome was obtained through that certificate. So that's something we need to be very thoughtful of and think about that. That's what we're going to be depending on in the case of a federal monitoring or at the state level when our state monitors come in. And for those agencies out there that have subgrantees, that's the same thing that you would be looking at whenever you're going out to your subgrantee. So the last section I have on the work programs is the other funding source section, which is not a required field in STARS, but maybe it should be, so you at least have to think about it and at least talk into it. So this is where we want to know who your partners are on this work, on this work. And this is going to help you be able to formulate who are you working with. And sometimes it explains and fills in a lot of questions or a lot of cracks. So for example, if we have a work program that is high in administrative and program support costs and have almost no client assistance costs, sometimes we can find that those client assistance costs are actually being covered by another work program that or another funding source that is able to cover those costs. So that helps communicate with us on who the other players are. Another thing that helps us out a lot is we're trying to reach out to identify who would be good state partners, who maybe we need to be talking to. If we can find some trends in this other funding source category, it helps us to know, okay, a lot of you have funding through DHS. We're going to try and reach out to DHS and that department and say, look, we share um, this common agency or these common agencies that are doing it. Let's work collaboratively to try and come up with documents that both of us are happy with and able to utilize. So when we're talking about the budget area on the bottom of the work programs and stars, you know, we just clumped these into the larger categories: the program support, the direct client assistance, admin, and then the special costs. So the program support should be tied to a logical methodology. It's difficult to tie dollar for dollar from program support back to a particular program. But if say it's a housing program and you're paying a housing coordinator to work specifically in that program, or it's a financial literacy program and you're paying somebody specifically in the financial literacy to do the financial literacy, we can track those and know it's going to be higher there, and we would expect those costs there. But for the rest of those costs, like the copier cost, the paper cost, you know, staff time and things like that, there needs to be some sort of logical methodology, whether it's you know, the number of clients that you're seeing, whether it's some sort of estimate on how long you spend with this client, and then you kind of add those up throughout all the work programs and come up with something. That should be a logical methodology you're using. Client assistance now is the easiest one for us to tie straight back into the budget. So on the budget line items, your budget sheets underneath the client assistant should specifically state what work program that's being tied to where we can look at the client assistance on the scope of work and the client assistance on the budget and be able to see that correlation and know that they match, and that should be the easiest one for us to match. You know, remember, scholarship now has its own line item on the budget sheets and that. And then I guess while we're talking about client assistance, also to kind of redefine or make sure everybody knows, there's a difference between, so we have three different kinds of client assistance. We have direct client assistance, we have indirect client assistance, and then we have the scholarship. The scholarship, that's the scholarship funds that we give you out of discretionary funds in order for you to run the work programs. When we're talking about direct client assistance, that's when we can tie the funds that client assistance to a particular family or household or individual. A rental assistance program is direct client assistance because we can tie that directly. When we get to something like a food pantry, those funds that we're using to purchase food for the food pantry, that's indirect client assistance because we went out, we got cases of food and canned goods and things like that. But I can't tie the exact dollar amount that we're spending per person, you know, to that. So that would be indirect client assistance. It's we bought all of these things and we're going to give them out to the customers, but we're not necessarily going to know exactly how much of a value from that each individual customer received. Then we have the admin cost, which again this year is at 16% of the program and support and client assistance cost. You know, and at the end of the year, the thing to keep in mind on this, and this gets a little bit on the fiscal side of things, but to keep in mind on this, if you allocate 16% of your grant to administrative costs, but then you only spend 90% of your grant, you're not able to spend all 16% of that admin cost. You're only able to spend 16% of the actual cost that you spend. So if the actual cost ends up being at 100,000, only 16,000 of that can be the admin cost. Even if you had $20,000 listed in the admin portion, because that was 16% of the entire grant. But since you didn't spend the entire grant, you can't take all 16% of the cost. And then the final budget category is that special category. And we only use this at the time of modification under the the direction of the grant manager or the CSBG staff. Primarily, that's used for things like the training and technical assistance dollars that we gave in 2020. That would go with disaster relief funds that we give you in addition to your regular allocation. As soon as we get the Tiki project back up and running, it would fall underneath that. So that's kind of my rundown and my talk about creating work programs and how to do this. So a couple of final thoughts I have is multiple work programs using the same work program number. That is not a good thing to do. It's going to mess up the reporting and that. So what we've done at STARS is we have work programs out there that almost all the work programs, there's 3 different work programs that are all the same. The only difference is one will say have in parentheses behind it 1, the next one will have in parentheses behind it 2, and the next one will have it behind it 3. So if you're running work programs that are that similarly aligned, that they have the same work program name, but for some reason you're wanting to have them separated, maybe it's 2 different funding sources that are wanting to track them on their own. You know, it's fine to do that, but we need to make sure they're 2 different work program numbers whenever we're looking at that. The next thing, and this is kind of my sticking point. This is something that I'm really big on, and I've really been pushing for the last year and a half, going on 2 years now, and that's disaster relief. I think the CSBG program plays a key role in disaster relief, that disaster recovery period of a natural disaster, whether it's tornadoes or flooding or you know, even a massive fire, things such as that. I think CSBG can play a critical role in reaching out to our customers and making sure that we're serving their needs. So I would encourage every agency to have a disaster relief work program. If you don't typically have very many people, don't stick much money in that, but make sure you have it set up with the different types of services and activities you plan on providing in the event of a disaster. And this is a good time to plug the conversations with Adrian, where we're talking to IEMA about VOADs and COADs and how we can get involved in disasters and working with our partners so we have well-defined goals and services that we're offering in the event of a disaster. So I would encourage every agency to have a disaster relief program. If you don't typically have a disaster, you don't have to obligate a lot of money to it. But it's a lot easier for us to move money and for you to have that services already set up in an approved document than it is for us to be scrambling at the last minute trying to create something. If you're an area that has flooding, so for example, Rockford, the Rock Island River seems or the Rock River seems to flood every year. You know, if you're along the Mississippi River, that floods more times than not during a course of a year. You're probably going to have a flooding at least every other year. You know, so it's good to go ahead and have that disaster relief and go ahead knowing, you know, what you're going to need to do and have some money allocated aside for that and work that into your plan. So the next thing on the final results is looking at past results. I've talked about this 3 or 4 times, but I really want people to walk away understanding that we need to be looking at past results as we're trying to move forward and plan for the future. I think it's a pretty common statement that the past is destined to repeat itself. And so I think unless we're doing something substantially different, unless there's some big changes, you know, those past results are really going to help play a role in figuring out what's going to go on in the future. And then the last thing is no data without stories and no stories without data. So if we don't have the data, you know, there's no stories to tell. And there's no stories to tell if we don't have the data to back it up. And that's something that we need to do a very good job. I know ICA is working on some storytelling type presentations and things. So we really need to get better about telling our stories and being able to communicate those stories to the network. So with that, my time has about come to an end here, and I still sometimes get a little bumbled up on how to stop my sharing. So I'm at about 50 minutes right now. My goal has always been to try and stay underneath an hour. So for a change, I'm actually meeting my goal and getting that. I appreciate the time that you spent with me during this webinar to talk about creating the work programs and how we can make the most impactful work programs possible. And as my grant managers always love to hear me say, you know, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to our grant manager. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day.